managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at Sec Weekly. And clips are my favorite. We've got so many great clips in the show. I mean, if you try and listen to the show all together, it's really long. So I love the idea of pulling out clips for people to enjoy, because we've had some great moments in here. You know, they're 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes long, and it's I'm happy we're starting to pull those out and share those. All right, now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news, which anytime we take off for a few weeks, we end up with a lot of news piled up, and today is no different. A surprising amount of news came out around the holidays. Some of it was not planned. We've got some breaches on the list here, and some of it was. So we're not going to cover everything. There's 38 stories here. You can go to securityweekly.com/ESW301 if you want to check out all the stories that we've shared today. But we've got, really it's 8 funding items here. And the first one, A16Z, for some reason, threw $100 million at another crypto startup. And this one is encrypting stuff they're putting on Ethereum. So that's how it found its way into my security feed. And typically, I'll just filter these out. We'll cover Web3 stuff if there's anything really security related. But I threw this one in because 100 million's big for a Series B. And I wanted to discuss to see if anybody had some insight into what otherwise just looks like an encrypted read-only database. Like why is that worth $100 million? I don't know.
Wow.
Old man shouting at cloud status here. I'm achieving.
Yeah. And my first gut was like, holy smokes, are they still investing in crypto? But then after this whole FTX thing, I was like, gosh, they're still putting money to work at crypto. Didn't all these institutionals learn from FTX? Yeah. But is it crypto or is it a blockchain tech, right? Those are two fundamentally different things when you think of investing.
It's indirect crypto, right? It's and they might be making that distinction now, where they might have shifted their funding policy and just going after blockchain stuff. But still, I think blockchain is probably one of the most disappointing technologies, or maybe I shouldn't say disappointing, just it is what it is. It was just most overhyped maybe of the last decade, technologies of the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be a direct function of just a earliness of the tech. It's only been around for a handful of years, which when you're talking about massively transformative tech, you got to let that stuff bake in the oven a long time generally before it massively transforms anything, right? Like think about when we first started talking about cloud compute and things like that. It's 15 years ago? I don't know the exact dates, but it's a long time ago. And we still barely cracked, a large percentage of companies using these technologies. And that's a massively transformative tech. So I wonder if, the tech's important, it's just super early.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was that Bitcoin hit and went up and up and up, and a lot of people felt like they missed that train earlier on. There's the joke about someone spending $100 on a pizza because they bought it with Bitcoin in the early days. I think a lot of it is this FOMO, this fear of missing out, that something crypto related, something that is part of the blockchain, it's either they're going to miss what it is, and if they get in early, they throw some money at it. Maybe they can ride that wave as they go forward with it, and I think that's part of what we're seeing with Web3 as well. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think one of the things that limited use cases for a blockchain was the fact that it was completely transparent. Anybody could grab a copy of it. So that limited your use cases, right? But, I haven't seen anything before now that would prevent you from encrypting at least part of the data that you put on there. So it's I feel like I have some very recent relevant insight into like how this might be used after investigating how both LastPass and 1Password selectively use encryption. Because I think part of my and we have both those stories, or the LastPass is a big chunk of the breach stories that we have on here today, and I think the assumption, like when you hear of these password management solutions talking about vaults, the metaphor of a vault doesn't work very well because everything inside the vault is protected equally. And that's just not how encryption is used for password managers. Like 1Password is a SQLite database, and the stuff that needs to be encrypted is encrypted, and the stuff that doesn't, like last date it was, or the date it was created, last date it was modified, last date it was used. So a lot of dates in there, and some other information isn't. And the big contentious thing with LastPass is they didn't encrypt the URL field, which, going through my old LastPass stuff, I found a ton of secrets attached as parameters to URLs in that URL field. So that I think it's interesting as we start talking about encryption on blockchain. So maybe it enables new use cases, is my long-winded way of using the password manager example.
Well, as the old saying goes, encryption's easy, key management is hard. So if they figured out some novel approach to key management that it enables some sort of distributed control and secure capabilities around that, then maybe it could be interesting.
But is it quantum resistant?
The thing that's kind of neat here is like, if we're talking, definitely not quantum resistant. If we're talking about, like, the cool thing about Ethereum, when I was researching Ethereum, I did some investing in Ethereum early on. It's supposed to be a kind of like a digital contract, digital compute system, so that you can write code onto the Ethereum blockchain that gets executed.
Smart contracts.
Right, smart contract that gets executed. And more so than smart contracts, it's just not it is a contract, but it's also, you can code on top of it, which makes it a blockchain compute engine. I mean, in theory, that is the coolest idea that I've heard in a long time. It's just maybe so freaking early that it's just, I don't know. As I read through this, I'm going, they're trying to realize exactly what Ethereum was trying to realize from day one, just in a better way, which is a great storyline. And storylines are how you get money sometimes.
And code
I
has
agree
mistakes.
with Ethereum.
So sorry, real quick, Sean. I was just going to say that there's a whole cottage industry of smart contract scanning tools. Looking for issues in your smart contract code. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, Ethereum is very cool. The whole smart contract and approach to leveraging the blockchain for not just a method of tracking what transactions occurred, but also to have some other elements where you can have some smart contract type capabilities. Very, very cool. But obviously, a lot of scammers have leveraged that in order to extract money out of people's wallets. And do some interesting things. And I think a scanner is a fascinating way to do it. I think that when you have a system or a solution or a technology that provides amazing capability, certainly there's going to be some the kind of underground part of that as well. It's going to be interesting to see how blockchain actually progresses. One of the biggest limitations that I'm aware of with blockchain is just transactions per second. Like, they are severely limiting to the point where you just can't realistically transact at an approach that a business or approach a business level, a business level of what would be required in order to have transactions that would meaningfully run a business. That part of it is always the interesting thing to me.
So, and that's a really important point for a couple of reasons. And I think that is an issue with some of the earlier blockchains, but I've heard some were created specifically to address the transactional issue. But I think with Bitcoin, I don't know if it's still this way. You know, there's some proposals to fix this somehow, but I think it was 7 transactions a second globally, like was the fastest you could add stuff to, to the Bitcoin blockchain. But yeah, even if they fix that, the other issue I saw with a lot of use cases for Ethereum is that there was still a gas fee, like because it was wrapped around currency. Like a lot of these use cases just wouldn't work if it cost you $80 a record to add a record to that blockchain, to add a record to that database. Like that prices you out of a whole bunch of stuff. Like, and that was before the market downturn. I think it was like $80 to $100 if you wanted to mint an NFT. And I think the vast majority of NFTs people were minting were worth vastly less than $80 to $100.
I was going to say NFT was definitely where people started hearing about gas fees, certainly where I did. You mentioned about 7 transactions a second. MasterCard's network is estimated to run at about 5,000 transactions per second. So obviously it's an order of magnitude difference between the two. And I don't know if that's a solvable problem until you get to quantum computing.
Yeah, the credit card processor I joined in 2001 was my first big career salary job back when I was a young man. We did 4.5 million transactions a day. So I don't know what that comes out to in transactions per second, but yeah, it's a lot more than 7 per second, right?
Absolutely.
All right, moving on. Let's see. Yeah, honestly, I didn't have time to look into a lot of these. I am aware of VMray. I think that's like a malware detection and analysis tool. Yeah. So that's interesting seeing them get funding. I've not seen malware analysis and detection last decade were huge. FireEye, it had all these companies selling appliances that would do it on-prem for you. They take malware that had never been seen before and analyze it for you. And obviously, it's still an important tool, I think, for some people on the enterprise side. But I don't know, Sean, if you have any insight on the relevance of malware analysis, the automated malware analysis these days. Do we need another Virus Total, or what's the other big one? I think it was a Korean tool, hybrid analysis.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges with what we've had as far as automated tools like Virus Total is it says, or at least what a lot of people expect, is that they upload a sample and it runs against a number of different antivirus type engines. However, the cloud components of those engines usually aren't captured as part of that. So it may say there's no detection on Virus Total for it, but when you actually run it against whatever that standard antivirus is, it uses the cloud component of that, and it detects that yes, this is actually malicious. I think the automated elements of scanning across a number of things that we're seeing in the industry is pretty interesting, especially around malware, because what is malware? It's something that's doing something that we don't want it to. There's ways to evade. There's ways to make it look like it's normal. Certainly, there's a lot of different techniques for malicious code to evade detection. One is to check to see if it's actually in a VM. Most people do not run code or run an application in a virtual machine. They're actually running it on their computer, which is typically a laptop. So if the malicious code can detect that it's in a VM or some sort of virtual container, it very often can identify that hey, this is being analyzed, and maybe I can just go ahead and show that it's not doing anything untoward that would be unexpected and should be normal. So I think that if there are some novel approaches to how to better detect malware and better extract what those elements are that are malicious, then sure, let's see what can be done here. I think there's room for improvement for sure.
Does anyone else hear the name Cybercube and think of the Borg, or is it just me?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, the name gave me pause for sure.
That's the name of their ships. Like if I were to just see the Borg, and need to come up with a name for their ships, I would go with Cybercube.
That's the biggest news on that fundraising. Not that they raised whatever they raised, $50 million for growth. What really matters on that news is the name of their company.
Yeah. And it looks like they're, I forget the acronym for this, but basically companies that cyber insurance vendors basically outsource, the job of determining, how much of a policy to approve, how to price the insurance policies. And it's my understanding that's kind of where Cybercube is at. They enable reinsurance placement is the terminology on their website. I'm trying to translate that. Underwriting decisions. Yeah. So we've seen a lot of these, and we've got more to talk about cyber insurance later. I think one of them is questioning whether or not cyber attacks can continue to be insurable if they continue at the current rate. And then another one is basically Ohio Supreme Court saying ransomware is not insurable under physical damage policy, which I think most people are going to say, duh. But it just I think further shows that it's a challenge to get insurance to pay out on this stuff, and it's going to be more of a challenge in the future. I think there's going to be a lot more situations where there's a catch to your policy where they need to determine if it's worth paying out, whether you were negligent or not, that kind of thing. So interesting to see how that goes.
We've had some experts on in the past, and they certainly know a lot more about cyber insurance than I do. But it seems to me, based on everything we've heard and all the research I've done and talking to people about their plans, well, first of all, this isn't atypical of the insurance industry, but that it's almost, insurance is supposed to be a CYA, right? But it's almost impossible in the majority of cases because technology, the digital ecoverse, cybersecurity is so complicated that there's always going to be a layered problem, a layered issue, a layered attack progression. And so there's always going to be a way that an insurance company can say, you did these 27 things, but the 28th one, that was where the problem was. And because this is not a very clear, it's not like a car accident. If somebody runs a red light or if somebody changes lanes without looking, like these are not straightforward types of events. And so there's always going to be something that gives an insurance company an opportunity to say, no, you don't qualify because you were negligent here. So that really makes me question the whole industry, really. Not cybersecurity, the cyber insurance
industry. Yeah. So I think this nicely dovetails into, let's see, number 22. So Rackspace, Sean, would you, if you were Rackspace's cyber insurance policy holder, would you pay out on that policy in their case?
Well, given that I've worked with cyber insurance companies in the past, I don't know that I can respond to that directly, but I will say that one of the things that could be a limiting factor for any insurance policy payment would be potential negligence. And that term has certain meaning in different areas. If a patch was released for a certain product, in the case of Exchange, it was released and it was determined that was the result or that was the reason why the Rackspace Exchange environment was breached, then that could be something that could make that a situation where a cyber insurance provider might say, no, we're not going to pay on this because you didn't do your due diligence or didn't do what most people would feel was appropriate. Now, Kevin Beaumont's post on Mastodon has a ton of information that he has broken down as he's done in the past on many other topics around Exchange, and he's been focused on Exchange security for a number of years and highlighting issues with Exchange configurations. I used to run an Exchange and Exchange servers before, including one personally at home, which I stopped a long time ago, thankfully. Exchange is very difficult to get right. It's been around for a very long time. I remember working with Exchange 4.0, And a lot of things that Exchange servers need in order to process email and to operate correctly is internet access, which means that you have to have a connectivity into your Exchange server, not just for SMTP for your standard Exchange interactivity or email interactivity, but also the Exchange components. So you're talking about Outlook Web Access, you're talking about other components such as the mobile accessibility. So all of these add pathways for attackers to connect in, and certainly if there's a known vulnerability, that's a significant issue. A number of the Exchange vulnerabilities that have come out over the past 2 or 3 years are things that were active in the wild. I've said before that if you're running an Exchange server, that you probably really should be looking at a hosted provider. At this point, Rackspace themselves has shifted everything over to Microsoft 365.
Yeah, they shut it down. It was so bad they shut the whole thing down.
Yeah. So when you get to the point where even a hosted provider feels like Exchange is best hosted and run by the vendor Microsoft, then this is definitely a gut check for 2023 for anyone who still has on-prem Exchange servers, because it is difficult to secure. And then you have the whole situation where you have hybrid, where you have Exchange servers on-prem that have mailboxes as well as those that are in Microsoft 365 as well. So yeah, it's not an easy thing, and running Exchange, securing Exchange is a big challenge, and there's a number of ways to compromise Active Directory by compromising Exchange. So the whole thing ties together and results in a very bad day for folks who are not actively patching and ensuring Exchange is updated.
Yeah, it was a breathtaking breach. I mean, just the scale of it, and it's interesting because the scale of Rackspace is pretty big. This is a $3 billion revenue company, so not quite as big as most of the big public cloud players. But their hosted Exchange product was only 1% of their 30 billion revenue. They said around in their 8K, they said around 30 million per year was what they made there. But the number of customers, we don't have an exact number, but it's either thousands or tens of thousands. And to give you an idea of the scale of small and medium-sized businesses that were running hosted Exchange with Rackspace, Rackspace hired 1,000 people just to handle the support requests between December 2nd and I guess still maybe today. They say they've gotten 3/4 of their customers moved over to Microsoft 365, and they have recovered. I don't know if they've said how much of the data they've recovered, but it looks like they're on track to recover most of the hosted Exchange data. Basically, their CrowdStrike came in and helped them clean up each of those hosted Exchange servers, and they're bringing them carefully online one at a time, extracting all the mail data as a PST, handing that off to customers so that they can then import it into Microsoft 365. But yeah, so on the one hand, I've got to say, very impressive how they handled it. You know, it's a company that has always referred to their own support as fanatical. You know, so they had no choice but to throw everything they had and more into responding to this and taking care of customers. But at the same time, there's no word on whether the attackers exfiltrated any of that data.
So having worked breaches before, that's always where you get very cagey in language as far as what you admit to, what you agree to, what you say has actually occurred. Certainly, as CrowdStrike does their investigation and works on the incident response, more information will be forthcoming through Rackspace. It's a challenge when to communicate publicly what you've identified and how, as well as obviously what is the liability that, say, Rackspace might have in the situation, especially if they have local government customers, which Kevin in his post has pointed out that there's a number of local government customers that host their email on Rackspace, or at least have. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that Rackspace customers are going to start looking at is, okay, well, do we continue with Rackspace, or do we just directly switch over to Microsoft? At this point, I don't know that it matters if Rackspace is ultimately Rackspace email is ultimately being hosted by Microsoft 365. But yeah, it's it is an interesting situation because, as we've seen with the Lastpass breach, there's information that has come out over time, and with really any breach, there's information that comes out over time. The first thing that's admitted is that there was a breach. They're evaluating and identifying what was actually what was affected as part of that. You start identifying, okay, what level of customer information was affected, because that's one category. If there's privacy information that was affected, or in Europe, if it's GDPR, how these things impact what the company needs to do and with their response times on certain things, because that matters also. A lot of companies have contractual obligations to respond and notify a customer if certain types of information was breached or exposed. It doesn't necessarily have to show that it was captured, exfiltrated, downloaded to an attacker, but was it exposed? And so there's different levels of responsibility that companies have depending on what space they're in. So Rackspace is certainly going to be going through that process with CrowdStrike to help them identify what was affected, what level of diligence do they need to do from this point forward. I do find it very interesting that they had termed the customer mailbox data that was hosted on Rackspace's legacy and is providing a PST file that can be downloaded for the customer. Migrating a lot of data takes time, and the easy button is really export to PST, because there's a native function for that as part of the old school migrations for Exchange. I remember migrating Exchange mail data from Exchange server to Exchange server, and it was a huge pain from an older system to a newer system. So absolutely, I understand why they would want to just export that to PST, provide it to the customers, and have them kind of do the work. But that really sucks going into January 2023, and now all of a sudden, as maybe the one IT support person has to then figure out how to download and import dozens, if not hundreds, of PSTs. That is not a fun day. So
PST.
I feel for them.
Yeah, how big are those PSTs?
They're going to be big, especially if the customers have had mailbox data in there for a while. I mean, I don't think you're too far off. There's going to be some that are very, very large.
Would that be a single PST per Exchange server, or certainly not per account on the Exchange server? That would be nuts in some cases.
It's per account, yeah. So each mailbox would have its own PST. Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a lot of PSTs. Some of those are going to be pretty big, especially with people that, I mean, after a while, once I think Gmail dropped the super large mailbox sizes, then everyone else was like, yeah, we'll do large mailboxes sizes. I remember when Gmail was first announced, and everyone's like, are you crazy? There's no way you can provide a gig mailbox. Like, that isn't just not possible. And Google's like, we're doing it.
Yeah, and then I think it maxed at like 17 gigs, and then they were like, "Yeah, you need to delete some stuff. You don't need all this crap."
Right, because there are database limitations on the back end. I mean, Exchange has upped and increased those sizes over years. So yeah, there could be some that are gigabytes, multi-gigabytes to tens, if not hundreds of gigabytes. Downloading and importing those are going to be a real big pain, especially since they have to get downloaded from Rackspace and then ultimately uploaded into Microsoft Office 365 into that environment, assuming that the IT support personnel at each of these different companies that are customers of Rackspace even decide to do that. They may just provide the PST files in the user's home drives and say, here's how you can connect that to Outlook. Which is probably what I would do initially, and then figure out what the migration process would be, maybe even getting the last 6 months of email imported in. But yeah, it's not what you want to wake up to in the new year, unfortunately.
You know, when this breach began, when I first saw this announced, I went to Intermedia's website to see if they still did Exchange hosting, and they did, and it was there. Now when I go there, I don't see it on their website.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of hosting providers are looking at risk and looking at what the value is. I mean, as was said, this is 1% of their revenue, so obviously not that big of a deal to shift off of that. I mean, no, not at all. And I would probably predict that anyone else that's doing actual Exchange hosting is probably just going to shift over to M365 as well, because it's just not worth it at this point when you look at the price. like you're scraping for profit on it anyway because you're hosting your own
and
system.
Their stock got hammered, and they're I'm sure paying out the nose for CrowdStrike to come in and do all the stuff that they're doing, and it's just not worth it.
No. Breaches are very costly. They're very expensive, and it's not just the cost of the actual incident response company. It's the cost of your personnel. People get burnt out. They work 80, 100, 20-hour weeks. They get burnt out quickly, and before you know it, you lose some of your best people. And then, of course, there's the brand and reputation issues behind that. So, yeah, it's not a good day for them, for their operations and support folks as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so speaking of breaches, Lastpass is the other big one that actually happened last August, but it was December 22nd when Lastpass updated the blog post, added an update to that blog post that they originally posted in August. That was very confusing to a lot of people. The blog post still said we recommend our customers take no action, but at the same time, they're like, yeah, they got all the data. They got all your vaults are gone. And it was unclear what was encrypted in those vaults and what wasn't. They didn't have like a distinct list. They just said, some stuff is encrypted, like, for example, and they listed a few examples, and didn't generate a whole lot of confidence, that blog post. And in fact, the way it was worded, a lot of folks through the holidays thought that it was saying that one type of notes field was encrypted and other types of note fields were not. And I think that's where most people put their backup codes. If they use 2FA and they're told to save their backup codes, I think most people just dump them into the notes field of that password entry. So a lot of people were saying, oh, crap, all my backup codes, you can bypass 2FA on all my accounts. And a lot of people spent the holidays resetting all their accounts, going one by one through hundreds of accounts that they had stored in Lastpass and resetting those. But I spent some time actually downloading. I found a GitHub project that allowed you to pull your vault. It told you how to pull it out of the browser because it actually gets loaded into the browser. So you can actually download your entire password vault using dev tools in Chrome out of your browser, and then it gave you the ability to parse it into a CSV, either encrypted or you could choose to decrypt it if you gave it your master password. And I did that, and I compared both the encrypted and decrypted version, and it finally answered all my questions that the press release, that the blog post should have answered. So it seems like it's still going to be a theme in 2023. Same thing with Slack's press release over their breach that happened over the holidays, which was GitHub related, similar to Okta's GitHub related source code compromise. These press releases really aren't giving customers much confidence, I think, and they're not answering the questions they need to answer.
Yeah, and it's a black eye for the industry as well, because when you're looking at something as that should be secure, I mean, you said it earlier, Adrian, a vault is a vault. Like we're used to the physical representation of a vault. You put your money into that vault, you lock it, it's closed. Everything inside that vault is locked. So the concept of having some fields that are encrypted and other fields that aren't is very confusing and doesn't actually show that vault that vault approach is the right one, or is the right way to refer to it. And certainly LastPass having this issue affects all the others as well, because it erodes trust. People then start going, all right, well, maybe I should buy that notebook from Target or Walmart and just go ahead and start writing my passwords down in that and keep that right next to me, because that's more secure relatively than a vault that's stored in the cloud that potentially others could access. So yeah, it's not a good thing, and it's been tough enough getting people to even move to a password vault system where they are using better passwords because the system generates them or not. At this point, I'm just telling family members to go ahead and use the Apple vault that's built into the Apple products, because it's a little. First of all, it's integrated, and second of all, it just works. And the third point of it is Apple's pretty good at securing data, or at least hopefully is. But it all comes down to trust, just like all these things in cloud. We have to have some level of trust when it comes to these systems. And when that trust is eroded by something like Rackspace or something like Lastpass, then it makes it more difficult. Makes it more difficult for people to be able to do the things that are going to help them with their security ultimately.
And I was just going to iterate what you said, Sean, about, it's been hard enough to move people to a password vault. I still know a lot of people who are not in security, not in tech, who don't even know what it is and think that the idea of a password vault is just so complicated and confusing, and when it's really just not. And I don't know how much this hit the mainstream. Probably not as much as it is in our minds, but it, like you said, again, it is a black eye on the industry on one hand, but on the other hand, if you're that giant target, obviously attackers are going to be trying to come after you. Doesn't make it any easier for those of us who have vaults, and we know that they can be compromised just as easily as anything else if proper measures aren't taken. But this sure doesn't go a long way for our credibility as security practitioners when we say, hey, use these security tools, and then the security tools themselves are breached, because in the mainstream it's still really hard to convince people that cybersecurity matters.
Yeah, and these are not just consumer tools or not just business tools. These are consumer tools as well. So, Pat, a lot of us have been spending years trying to talk family and friends into using password managers. And man, LastPass making us look bad.
Yeah, I even got my father to go on like the family plan and the upgraded plan. And, it's just hard because this is not the first password vault breach, right? It's hard to say with any credibility, hey, use this, you'll be better off. And then, oh, by the way, spend 40 hours updating all 3,000 of your passwords.
Yeah, I'm still working through mine. I hadn't touched it since 2018, 2019, maybe, because I worked for some companies that used it. So I ended up using it for some personal stuff as well, and some side projects. Like we used it for a little while for B-Sides Knoxville. And so I've got this mishmash of all this stuff that I've just got to one by one go through and clean up. And as I'm going, I'm looking at that URL field and saying, okay, can I take this string and log in? Because there's a lot of parameters that are just token equals, and it's like an OAuth token. Sometimes OAuth tokens never expire or don't expire for years. So it's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah, I can't believe they didn't encrypt that URL field.
That was something I was thinking.
I checked on that.
It was something I was thinking about when it was announced, I don't know, years ago when we found out LastPass didn't encrypt the URL field. And I thought the same thing, Adrian, that there's a lot of data that's passed through that. When my bank years and years ago, this is probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago, started providing online access to the bank and the associated credit card with it, I started looking at the URLs and saw that it was passing the full credit card string in the URL. So things like that could definitely have been captured in that URL field. So not only do we need to change passwords, but we should be checking to see what actually was put into that URL field when we added the URL. I stopped putting URLs in it at all once I found out that it wasn't encrypted, just because I like pain when I'm trying to log into the site. But you're right. I did the same thing. I took those recovery pins and information and put that into the notes field because, of course, notes would be encrypted, right? And I think there's still some uncertainty on that. I think there's probably a 99.
No uncertainty. Just to clear that up,
okay.
I checked on that. There's only one notes field, and it is encrypted in LastPass. So the only, there's a couple other fields that are unencrypted, but the big one that's unencrypted for LastPass is the URL field. Everything else you would expect to be encrypted, the username field, the password field, the notes field, is all encrypted. So the idea of secure notes and notes that are part of other entry types is just branding product branding stuff. There is only one notes field, and any entry you have in LastPass that has a notes field goes in that same encrypted notes field. So just to clear that up for people listening, I spent a lot of time over the holidays verifying that manually by picking apart my vault.
Yeah. Well, there was a person posting on Twitter, and at the moment I forget who it was, who went through and did an entire breakdown of the entire LastPass situation over the Christmas break, and spent a lot of time evaluating notes are encrypted versus not. And it seemed like it was pretty certain that they were encrypted, but there wasn't a good answer on it. So I'm glad to hear that, yes, they are.
Yep.
And it's just so unfortunate that, as cybersecurity practitioners, the industry has spent years talking about compliance doesn't equal security. And yet when it comes to these breach announcements and these notifications, they're doing the minimum required by law to meet compliance. And so they are thereby not doing right by their customers.
Yeah, and it's just like the whole confusion around the secure notes thing, like that's part of my rant on press releases here, on breach press releases. I think a lot of these companies are just actively doing damage to their image by not being as transparent and as specific as they should be in these. And I understand these releases have a lot of, like public companies have to think about what they're required to say. They've got different audiences. They've got investors, board members, regulators reading these press releases. So they've got to say the right things for them. But I've seen plenty of companies have, like the generic public statement, and then they do a blog post and they're like, okay, here's the technical breakdown of what was compromised, what was exposed, and what wasn't. There's no reason you can't do that I'm aware of, at least. I've seen tons of companies do it right. So it's frustrating when these companies actually create more problems for themselves, because I wasn't the only one, to read that press release or the blog post as, there's different types of notes field. One is encrypted, because they call one secure notes, and then there's just notes, so I assumed there were two notes fields, and no, they just implied that in their post and created more problems for themselves. So, yeah, same thing with Slack. Read Slack's latest one. Where they share some information, but they create more questions than they answer with their post. They say private code repositories were accessed by attackers, but they weren't like the Slack code repositories. So you're left wondering, okay, what were they then? What was compromised? So, it seems like it would have been easy to answer all the questions ahead of time there. And it's just frustrating to me. I think they're creating more problems for themselves than they need to.
Yeah, and it seemed like, sorry, back to the LastPass thing, it seemed like a lot of the biggest issue with it is that if the strength of your password, your master password for LastPass is weak, then you have more of a problem, and it's more likely that your vault could be exposed. Whereas if you had a stronger master password, then probably you could be okay. And I think that's part of the other concern and challenge around the LastPass situation is that it could affect this person worse than this person, especially if they used an email address that's public or that's well known. It doesn't give a good feel for the people that have used it. And so that's why I think we're seeing a lot of people migrating off into 1Password or elsewhere. Yeah.
And before we wrap up today, I know there's a ton of stuff here. We're just not going to have time to discuss. But Tyler, I wanted to kind of zoom out. We do have some funding items, but we also have some layoffs here. So I think it's a interesting juxtaposition. That we're still seeing. LP money. That needs to be spent. VCs are still spending that money. But then all the acquisitions, I don't know if it's or not acquisitions, sorry, layoffs that we're seeing happen to be companies who are unicorns, who fairly recently declared that they were unicorns. So it's So there's that, and I do have down here a little bit, number 30. Where is it? Where did I put these? I put our posts in here somewhere, Tyler.
Yes, I saw them earlier.
Yeah, 31 and 32, the Zombiecorn posts. So your thoughts on that? Your thoughts on the? Are we going to continue to see?
It turns out I have to unmute to answer your question.
Okay.
I was going to say, don't you have any comments on the
have you known
characteristically quiet on that one? I thought I threw you a softball, man.
You 100% lobbed it up for me, and I told you the number that it was on, everything. So
okay.
It turns out we're in this weird state of affairs with regards to businesses. They overinvested, overinflated, overvalued throughout 2021 and into early 2022, which put them in a weird state of being overfunded and having an inability to efficiently deploy the capital. Thus, the need for layoffs. But at the same time, there's so much dry powder on the side of investing, which is money ready to be invested, that there's some fantastic opportunities to look at small businesses in a down market that we can get involved with and invest in and watch them grow throughout the recovery of the market over the next 3 to 5 years. That, investments are occurring too. So we're just in this weird state where there's a reconciliation occurring for overly valued companies, right? And so really, I think it's a situation where we're merging a state of unicorns with a state of zombie companies, right? Zombie companies being companies that are in a state of what did we call it the other day, Adrian? Default dead.
Yeah, and default dead being that they've got capital, but not maybe not enough runway. Maybe they're not going to raise another round, so they're dead and just don't know it yet, right?
Right, and that's kind of the zombie world, right? Is this default dead state companies that may have a ton of capital, but have a valuation that's so high that it's literally going to take them way too long to ever get to that valuation. And so, you and I we created this term called Zombiecorns, which is a cross of a unicorn and a zombie company, right?
You get full credit for that.
Oh, no. We did it together on this pod. This pod created Zombiecorns. But I wrote a piece about, it's a tongue-in-cheek piece relating the movie Zombieland to Zombiecorns and how to survive the Zombiecorn apocalypse, which I think is a fun read. But the cool part was that you went through and you actually put a bunch of data behind it, and you did research and did actual journalism as opposed to my high-level snark writing. But yeah, I think we're just in this weird state where layoffs have to occur for the Zombiecorns of the universe to remain viable companies over time. And that's why we're seeing these massive layoffs simultaneously to large scale investments occurring.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure that there's really any kind of anything in the past we can point to. I mean, the 2008 recession, we saw the NAC space get hit kind of hard, but we've never really seen mass layoffs across the cybersecurity industry. So it's I think it was
last time we may have seen that, honestly, was the .com days, and the cybersecurity industry didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
There was you could count on one or two hands the total number of cybersecurity companies in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? So this is a reckoning for the cybersecurity industry to come to terms with what the valuations really need to be today. And they haven't been through it before. A lot of the cybersecurity leaders haven't been down this negative push ride before. Now, some of them have been down recessions, and some of them have been down situations like the .com days, but not in a cybersecurity capacity. So specifically how the cybersecurity market will react to this kind of downward forces is difficult, right? It's difficult to know in advance exactly what's going to happen. But, I think that the key to surviving being a zombie corn is being aggressive on your cuts, cutting deep, doing it once, and being transparent, and really, focusing on culture, focusing on a reset, finding a way to reset your business to a valuation, a size, a business model, and a growth rate that makes sense given today's economy. And it's just not easy to do. It takes massive, massive moves in a lot of these overfunded companies.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a shift in operation too, right? You know, it's you can't keep operating the same way you were when you were hiring 100 employees a month.
Yeah, you got to change the business model to match the realities of the market, right? And that's what a lot of companies are struggling to do right now.
And right before we wrap, I just want to call out Netwrix acquired Remediant, which is I think one of the we've only seen a few acquisitions, and since we had this downturn in the market and the layoffs began, it's good to see that we're still seeing acquisitions. I think we threw out there when the market was when the layoffs began and the unicorns stopped, that this would be a buyer's market. But I think our guess is that maybe companies in the early days of it had a hard time agreeing on a new valuation, because basically, the buyers are saying, look, those unicorn valuations you got before, you're not getting that in today's market, right?
That's right.
And obviously the companies getting acquired want to maximize the value for themselves, their investors, and their employees. So I think it took a couple of months for us to start to see the acquisitions, and the only one we have a comp for is Palo Alto picking up Cybersecurity for $195 million on $38 million raised. So that's roughly 5x on money raised. So it's not terrible, and it's a really tough comp to use because they weren't even a year out of stealth. Very, very early stage, and Palo Alto. The way they acquire companies, the deal sizes they do are kind of weird anyway. I'm surprised it wasn't a round number. Almost all their acquisitions are perfectly round numbers. But yeah, no, it's good to still see acquisitions here. And Netwrix looks like it's doing kind of a Fortra type thing where this is their 6th acquisition since getting picked up by PE firm TA Associates back in 2020. So they're putting together a war chest of security technologies and companies.
Yeah, we're going to see.
I think it's a smart thing to do right now. Right,
we're going to see continued consolidation, both at a tool level and a platform level throughout 2023, but certainly at a corporate development level, right? Even just at a pure business level, 2023 is going to be the year of cybersecurity acquisitions. You're exactly right. Why it hasn't happened yet. When there's enough runway and you don't have to sell, you can sit there as a founder and say, I'm going to wait. Maybe it turns. But if it doesn't turn, and the longer this macroeconomic downturn continues to run out, the more pressure will happen for these companies to sell off. And private equity is going to be ready. They got tons of powder on the side, ready to do roll-ups, ready to pull things together, ready to unify different markets. And so I think this is the year of private equity really getting heavy into security. And this is the year of acquisitions. And I think we can call it the harvesting, right? In many ways, it's like the final harvesting of 2 to 3 years.
Sounds like a horror movie. The harvesting.
You know what it is? It's it's like the quickening or the harvesting. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's finally coming to harvest all of the wheat that has been grown over the last 2 to 3 years. It's going to be harvested in 2023.
All right. And with that, I think that's all the time we've got today. Sean, are you still here, Sean?
I'm still here, yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us today,
I go
Sean.
quiet when Tyler starts talking about the VC world, because I'm listening quite aptly to it, because I don't know as much about that area as he does. Always interested to learn.
Thank you, John.
Well, Sean, Katie, Tyler, thanks for being here. Happy New Year to all of you and to everyone listening. And we will be back next week.